Hey up lads and lasses, Fletch here from Ultimate Halo, and thank you so much for tuning into the video. And I've had a few people reach out to me lately to ask why I've been so silent since the reveal of Halo Infinite. And as a Halo YouTuber, you'd kind of expect me to be all over this, making as many videos as I can so I can grow as much as possible in this time. Well, if you saw my reaction video, you can tell at times I was very excited, but if you're watching the stream live, you would understand that towards the end I did start to become a little bit more deflated, as I expected something different, just something a little bit more and see a bit more action. Then at that point it really started to sink in. I looked back at it in 4K and I started to look at the details of the trailer. It got me thinking about whether the game landed with me personally or not. Now don't get me wrong, over these next weeks there will be elements such as the open world, the gameplay and the story that we will discuss in depth in videos. But in today's video we are going to talk about the sacrifices this game has made visually to get its vision, and also is being on the Xbox One a part of that issue as well, with the game of course being cross-generational. So sit back, relax, and let's discuss.
Ultimate Halo.
First of all, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do so, as I make consistent Halo content, and let me know in the comment section down below whether you're happy with the graphical presentation and why. So for me, overall, I am pleased in what we saw. It shows promise, and I can tell you as a fact, 343 have much more to show us. So whilst it is easy for us to assume that it's an all-round representation of the game, I would suggest reserving your complete opinion until we see a lot more of the game. It's abundantly clear that a vocal part of the community isn't pleased with Halo Infinite's graphical presentation, and once you've watched this back, I would strongly recommend watching Digital Foundry's video breaking down some of the technical issues people are seeing, and then from there I'm going to give you some high-level issues like things such as popping for the foliage, distant clouds, and certain lighting situations that some models seem low in detail or don't cast shadows if they're not in well lit areas. I remember watching it for the first time in the live stream and seeing some of the grass pop out like you see in the bottom corner here. I don't think this is ideal for your first reveal of your flagship title. Stuff like this needs to not be visible in the gameplay reveal. Now what I do respect is that they aren't trying to fluff the game up, and it's not downgraded prior to launch. We don't want a Watch Dogs situation at hand with them working from home. It makes things a lot trickier for them. Another thing is watching the clouds pop in from the other side of the mountain tops, as well as weapons losing detail in shadowed areas of the screen. All of these things don't look great, but what we have to remember is that the game still has time in the oven, and there is word on the street that this build was from January. I'm sadly unable to verify it, but it's hard to say at this point. Now this game does seem to have a lot going on, and I think I might have some answers as to why we might be noticing these graphical oddities and why people might not be enjoying what they see, but just bear in mind I'm by no means a video game developer, but what little experience I do have in this realm I'm trying to give to you all now. So notice that most of the lighting in this game is dynamic. Now some might be thinking, what does that mean exactly? Well, to overly simplify for the sake of illustrating my point, previous Halo games bake lighting into the environment. What this means is everything is pre-calculated based on static light sources. Let's say we have this environment from Halo 3. All of this lighting for the most part is coming from one source, which is the sun. As such, the lighting is being baked, or if you want to put it in another way, it's being digitally painted on. This then saves the game from having to calculate the lighting on the go, whereas Halo Infinite has made technical decisions for the dynamic lighting due to it showing signs of it having a day-night cycle. Having a day-night cycle means that you cannot bake textures on, and this kind of lighting is more expensive. So to set a benchmark across all of the consoles from Xbox One to Series X and PC, there needs to be some sort of artistic change to help accommodate the game from a technical perspective. Examples of what I believe are sacrificed are real-time shadows of dynamic objects such as AI in the environment. On screen you can see an elite is in the building which clearly has interior lighting, but look how he's not casting a shadow, and when there's clearly a light source above him. I also personally believe that the brutes have gone for a bald look due to technical reasons too. I mean, just look at Craig here. The brute the community has made plenty of memes out of. Notice in previous Halo games they were always pretty hairy, but I don't think this is just an artistic choice, because having lots of hair on their body would be more expensive on the game engine, therefore having lots of strands of hair taking up resources on screen. So having a hairless brute would make this much easier, much likely like the reason Bungie went down this direction in Halo Reach, which I think the game was already pushing the Xbox 360 as it was. As such, Bungie kept them bald, it was less CPU and GPU usage, and it made the game run smoother. Then there are other smaller things that stand out to me as well, which I'm not too sure about at this point. One of these is how opaque the explosions and plasma effects are. There's not a lot of transparency in them, and I personally think it's more of an artistic direction rather than technical, but it's possible that the more transparent explosions could be more expensive on the game engine, but I wouldn't like to say because I'm not too experienced, but I do quite like the human explosions. They do look pretty nice. Another thing is the flight paths on the Phantoms. They look like they are on rails and they don't really have any fluid motion, and I would expect this to be fixed on launch because it really took me out of the experience. And there's also one last issue which I had with the final monologue from Escharum at the end. I love this speech. I think he's such a cool character already, and the fidelity is rather high on this model, but something that is spoiling the texture work on him, and I think it's something to do with the depth of field the engine is using. If you look at certain areas of his face, you can see there are very high levels of detail, but in the front, closer to the camera, it's blurring this detail, which makes it look very plastic-like. It just doesn't look very effective. I'm hoping that they can at least widen the range of depth of field so they can fit a lot more on without it being so heavy and really ruining the look of things. So with all this being said, why are we looking at the game like this, and why do these problems exist? Well, I, along with a few other Halo content creators, were invited to a call with 343 the night of the gameplay reveal to discuss the game and ask some questions around the footage that was shown. Now, one of the big takeaways I have from this was their focus on the sandbox. The possibilities are, and excuse the overused pun, but they are infinite. I'll draw big parallels between Halo Infinite and Zelda Breath of the Wild. So I'm going to pose a question to you all. What would happen if a Banshee came by and you grapple hooked onto it? That would be pretty awesome. That's your tool, much like the glider is in the Breath of the Wild. Then there are lots of systems in place to expand the possibilities for gameplay. We saw that Duquesne23 pointed out that when a suicide gun attacked the Warthog, it actually kept on driving whilst one of the tyres was blown off. This is a pretty big detail, but it's also very small at the same time. This, along with it being an open world game with a build that is, quote, a little while old, according to Chris Lee, the studio lead, means that things artistically and technically need to be re-envisioned compared to recent Halo games. Halo 5 was very linear, so you can put a lot more focus into the tiny details, but in Halo Infinite the game is based around these systems in play and the possibilities fans can come up with. So as such, the game is not comparable in many ways because of how different it is in terms of structure. The art style, I think, does look a little less realistic. I know particularly in recent years some things can look a little bit more realistic, but I would never say that Halo strived for hyper-realism, and even in Combat Evolved it didn't look that way. It's always looked a bit cartoony, and there's always been a big focus on the colour palette in most places. So with all of that being said, I think it's important to ask yourself at this stage, do you mind this change? If the answer is no, then I'd probably just say just have an open mind, because whilst you might have liked Halo in the past 10 years, there have definitely been issues to address to give the franchise longevity. If the answer is then yes, you do have an open mind, then great. It might not have been what you were expecting, and you might have been hopeful the graphical fidelity was better, but those things might be ironed out over time and they should grow on you. Me personally, I'm happy with the game overall, and I'm going to talk about the gameplay systems in a future video. I don't think they should have showed off the game with those graphical issues. I think it should have been more polished than that. I appreciate the unprecedented time we're living in with COVID-19, everybody's working remotely, and trust me, I've worked remotely from my job at times and it comes with its difficulties. I really understand that, particularly from a communication perspective when video games are such a huge collaborative project. The game is growing on me. I've put a lot more time into thinking about what I would change and what I really do enjoy, but at the same time, just bear in mind a lot more is coming, so I'm feeling optimistic. And as well, for those people who do like to constantly compare Halo Infinite to The Last of Us, which The Last of Us 2 looks like a fantastic game in a graphical perspective. I've not actually played it before, but a lot of that lighting is baked. That has its own graphical issues, but on the whole the presentation is great. But the scope of these two games is very different. Yes, one of Last of Us 2 kind of looks open world, but it's very limited in terms of scope. Halo Infinite has lots of AI on the screen that interacts with each other in very different ways, whereas games like that don't need very intelligent AI. They can be very simplistic in terms of how they behave. Like I've mentioned, there's dynamic lighting, and as well as this, there are many other things such as particle effects that take up lots of graphical requirements. So bear all of this in mind when you compare Halo to other games, because just because graphically they're not up to scratch doesn't mean that they're not good games, and there are reasons why you might have to make compromises. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Once again, my name is Jack Fletcher. You can find me on Twitter at FletchUH, and I will see you in the coming days with a brand new video. Ta-ra.
Subscribe now to Ultimate Halo for more unfriggin' believable Halo content.